So for this last video, we're going to do a recap. We're going to go through all the primary steps with any details along the way, as well as adding a few tips and suggestions and other things I forgot or thought of after I made the other videos. I'm putting this in a separate video so that it's an easy, quicker reference that you can just jump right in and get the list and see the list and pick out the particulars of the steps if you need to. The first step we're going to do, we're going to make a work folder and we're going to copy the car parts to it. Of course, you may do this however you wish, and that applies to most of this, but this is my method and what I did. This step can be kind of skipped if you don't have individual parts. If you just have one mesh for the whole car, then you can just skip this part and skip the second, well, not so much the second part, but you can skip the first part and just use the mesh, but still make a copy. I would still recommend making a copy of the mesh. Then you're going to put that mesh on a map somewhere and edit it with the tools in UE5, with the modeling tool and the tri-selector, whichever one of them you choose to use. This is where you're going to remove mesh parts that aren't going to be seen or that don't suit whatever purpose you're going to be using this for. Then step 3, if again you have the parts individually, you assemble the parts on the work map and line them up. In the case of the city cars, they align naturally just by putting them all to 0, which is nice. This process will work for other assets that might have a similar multi-part vehicle or whatever, but the primary goal here is with the city cars project and those cars. Then you're going to group select all of the parts and create a new static mesh. In this case, I put that into the folder where the parts are, where I've stored the parts, as my kind of baseline mesh. You're then going to edit that static mesh and fix the materials and correct them to where they should be for all the parts on it. This is also the step where you're going to decide on if I want to use most of the same black color for everything, for all the black pieces or most of the black pieces, and for any pieces that don't show up because I've edited them out. So I put them to the same material. That way you have a whole bunch of references to one material, and hopefully it helps to reduce down when you do the later steps in making the merge materials. Then we're going to take that static mesh once you finish editing the materials and get them correct. You're going to place that mesh on the map, select it. You have to have that on the map and selected in order to use the merge materials. Then you go to the merge materials and the settings. You'll have to refer to the other video or whatever settings you choose. Save in a different folder for each car. This part relates to step 8, which is the color, changing the colors if you want to do that step. To change the car color, we change the body materials. In the case of the city cars, it should just be with the parts method, there should just be 3, 2 doors and the main body. By changing the body materials, and then repeat step 7, merge the materials, save in a different folder. And then as you go or when you get them all done, you test the result by putting any of the materials onto one of the merge mesh materials or merge meshes that you've created in step 7. So this is the basic workflow. Your sticking points in terms of time are certainly going to be editing the parts to remove the mesh parts and correcting the static mesh materials. Other notes here refer to if you want to create outside of this is just to make the base car with repetitive color or with different colors. If you wanted to, let's say, have the doors open or something like that, alter the doors a little bit. That's about the only thing you really can do here. But if you had a situation like that, then you would need to start back at this step. You would group the selected parts, create a new static mesh with the doors in whatever position you want, and work flow from there. This step, number 5, then, because fixing the materials, then, this is the important step in that case when you have multiple vehicles of the same vehicle, multiple versions, that you would need to fix the materials so that both or all of the static meshes have exactly the same materials in exactly the same, for exactly the same parts. And again, as a reminder, not necessarily the exact same element number slot. They could move around. Again, refer back to the previous videos for details on that. An important part of the merge the materials for the city cars is, and I probably mentioned it in the previous step, but just again as a recap, when you're setting your merge materials parameters, make sure to click reuse light maps down near the bottom. For the city cars, I found, I think in every case, that you have to reuse, or else you get really, it doesn't come out right. Even the material's all messed up. And you get either a solid color, all chrome, or just blotchy, weird stuff. So now this particular merge materials, because this method will work for other things too, or it can. You may have to adjust any given step for a different asset type from different, providers on the marketplace. For instance, I had one that had a construction set, and I did not use in the merge material step. I did not use reuse light map. If you used reuse light map in that case, it messed it up. So you had to turn that off in that case. Another thing to keep in mind is that when you're doing the edit car parts to remove mesh parts, I did run across a situation with, again, those construction ones where if I remove certain things, this is before you've done anything in terms of these later steps. This is just saying I want to remove things that are not going to be seen. Certain things I removed messed up the material assignments for all the rest of the steps. I didn't really discover that till I'd edited one of the meshes almost completely, and then I did all the assembly, blah, 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 and then none of the materials would come out right. It wasn't just a matter of the materials not being in the right slot. They were just completely mismapped to the mesh. So you may have to do a little experimentation with this step and maybe do a quick assembly and testing for something that is other than the city cars project. The city cars project and those cars seem to handle this pretty well. You can pretty much freely remove just about anything, and it doesn't mess up the material assignments, but other things it might. And I discovered that much later, so that was something I didn't have in the original video, but very important to know. Collision, I didn't really address that here, but collision will, obviously when you do the group the parts and create a static mesh, you got a new mesh, so there is no collision. So at some point in here, you'll want to do your collision. Leave that up to you and how you want to do it and how customized you want it, or if you want to just use the thing, but just be aware that that's going to happen. Oh, also another thing I didn't actually mention, which I do, and it's up to you, is that when you are doing the copy the car parts and number 2 here, edit the car parts to remove mesh parts, before you do that, or go in and reduce down the LODs to 1, to a single LOD. Again, this is what I do. You may want to do it differently depending. But I found that sometimes that can kind of throw some things off too. It doesn't really manage the LODs very well sometimes when you start editing parts out. And then you go to make through all the stuff, you get to the end, it's still got 2 or 3 LODs on it, and then you start zooming in and out and everything goes wonky and strange. It pops the wrong way, or the materials get assigned wrong, or something like that. It's going to be easier to work from a single LOD at the start from the parts, and then go in later and create your LODs for your distances if you want to. For my purposes, I'm just letting the engine manage that for now. And finally, editing the mesh parts. This part, step 2. In order to do this process the way I've mapped it out, you need to do this step here and no other place, except at the very, very end, after you've gotten your car made and the materials made and the colors made, I would make a copy, but you could take a copy of the final mesh and you can try to edit stuff out from there. So, for instance, I do like a damage model of each one, and I remove a couple of tires. However, what's going to happen is, at this stage, step 2, you're going to have things work kind of as almost like an object. You're not really dealing with individual triangles. When you go to edit, say, a pipe or a tire or a fitting or other pieces in there, it mostly handles those as an object, at least when you select, the grouping method. So you're kind of dealing with things at a level that's very easy to edit and remove things and see as they get highlighted. You're not really dealing with individual triangles, which is very handy and makes it go much faster. However, when you get down to the last step and you've got your final kind of mesh done and your final materials, it's going to probably be more of a triangle removal method. So you're going to be removing groups or individual triangles. So it's much more tedious in this later step, but it is generally much safer to remove things if you want to create a slightly different version. Like let's say you wanted to remove a door. You could do it on the final step and not mess things up, because if you remove pieces at step 2 and then try to go through this, it may or may not. I haven't really tried it because it's very time consuming. But if you say you want to remove a door or a tire, if you start here with your parts and you've edited the parts down and you've assembled them, and then you say, and you've done your whole step here to make your primary car, and then you go back up here and you say to step 3, or step 2 really for that matter, and you remove a tire and you remove a door, and then you continue on from there and remake the mesh all the way down the line here like we described, it may or may not, the materials may or may not work. The process will certainly work, and you'll get a set of, the whole process will still work. But if you want to share the same material and textures across all your models that are modified like that, you're really going to want to do those modifications after you've created the car all the way down, as opposed to going back and doing it here and trying to move forward. Now you can try it if somebody gets it to work. If it does work, great. I think it's a lot of time to mess around with, and I think it's very time consuming to try that and have it fail. And I found that if there are certain steps in here, as I mentioned before, when you're editing the materials on step 5 and fixing the materials, if you create another car, open the doors for instance, and you go through this process and you get one material wrong that isn't matching exactly, none of this will work, and it'll be a completely different thing. Now, again, that's fine if you want to just create multiple versions. You can use this process to do that. It's just you'll have a separate material and separate textures that won't be interchangeable, and that may be a thing. All right, that's it. That's my presentation on how to do this. Giving you a lot of detailed notes and a lot of information to digest. I've tried to be as clear as possible, but again, this was not really mapped out, and I was trying to do it from a standpoint of just having references points for me for the future so I can reconstruct this if I have to. Hopefully I've made things as clear as possible. If anyone has any questions, please leave comments, and I'll go ahead and address them as best I can. Thank you, and enjoy.